At the beginning, I would like to mention that the Normans are an ethnic group from Normandy, a northern region of France, and a Duke of Normandy at that time was William the Conqueror. Let's talk about England. A new king of England after the death of Edward the Confessor was Harold Godwinson. He faced almost immediately two invasions, in the north and in the south, and the south coast was attacked by William the Conqueror. Now you understand? Harold, the king, rushed south, but was defeated and killed at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. This event is depicted in an embroidered cloth called the Bayeux Tapestry. Nowadays we might call it comics or something. When William the Conqueror became a king of England, feudalism and the French language became the dominant influence. For over 300 years, French was the language of power, spoken by royalty, aristocrats, and high-powered officials, some of whom couldn't speak English at all. During this time, thousands of French words entered the English language. That's the reason why do we say, for example, cow when talking about the animal, but beef when talking about the meat. The Normans had also an enormous influence on architectural development in Britain. Norman architecture means Romanesque architecture, characterized by rounded arches, particularly over windows and doorways, and especially massive proportions compared to other regional variations of the style. The most known castle is probably the Tower of London, officially Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress of the Tower of London, which is located on the north bank of the River Thames in central London. From this period of history we have also a great land survey, called the Domesday Book. It was ordered, again, by William the Conqueror. To be a good king he needed the information about the land he had conquered. With Normans is also connected the Canterbury Cathedral, which was destroyed by fire in 1067, a year after the Norman conquest. A pivotal moment in the history of the cathedral was the murder of the Archbishop Thomas Becket.
The House of Plantagenet was a royal house which originated from the lands of Anjou in France. The family held the English throne from 1154 with the accession of Henry II until 1485 when Richard III died in battle. This era was full of essential events for British history. Talking about essential events reminds me of Magna Carta Libertatum, commonly called Magna Carta, also Great Charter. It is a charter of rights agreed to by King John of England on 15 June 1215, first drafted by Archbishop of Canterbury to make peace between the unpopular king and a group of rebel barons. It is one of the most important documents in the whole history. Magna Carta became a symbol of liberty. Free men couldn't be arrested without a trial. But what does a free man mean, right? Magna Carta was remained many times during the 13th century until it was made a part of an official English law. The Great Charter lives for 800 years and is a core in Declaration of Independence and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Even though we talk about better conditions and freedom, life in Middle Ages wasn't that easy. In 14th century was so full and bitter that many horseback riders died of cold, frozen to death. Many women never survived childbirth and children often died very young. While the noblesse ate fine wheaten bread, the poor country people preserved their own food as a salting fish, bacon, eggs or milk. The poorest ate crusts of coarse rye. Rye crops were sometimes spoiled by a fungus disease called ergot. They became sick and saw strange visions. People rarely bathed and disease was common. In 1348, a new disease appeared at the port of Weymouth. It was known as pestilence, later as the Black Death. This terrible illness was spread by rats and their fleas, raging across England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland. It killed 800 people per day. Victims were buried in mass graves and there were no priests left to pray. It killed as much as a third to half the population and it cost England a lot. The Hundred Years' War was a conflict between England with King Edward III and France with King Philip VI and lasted from 1337 to 1453. Yes, You've not misheard that. It is actually longer than 100 years. The name comes from 19th century historians and has stuck just like that. Small battles have been going on between the French and English for years. However, in 1337, King Edward claimed that he was the only one rightful king of France. This began the long battle between the two countries. Edward III believed that he was the heir to the French crown through his mother Isabella. King Charles IV of France died without a male heir. Instead of Edward, the French chose Philip to be their king. When King Philip of France took control of Aquitaine from the English in 1337, King Edward decided to fight back. He decided to invade France. English defeated with only around 6,000 soldiers a much larger French force of around 25,000. Eventually the French gave in and named English king as the heir to the throne. Many of the people in France didn't accept English rule. In 1428, the English began to invade France in south. They began a siege of the city of Orleans. However, a young peasant girl by the name of Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, took leadership of the French army. She claimed to have seen a vision from God. She led the French to a victory at Orleans in 1429. She led the French to several more victories before she was captured by the English and burned at the stake. The French were inspired by Joan of Arc's leadership and sacrifice. They continued to fight back. They pushed the English army out of France, taking Bordeaux in 1453, signaling the end of the Hundred Years' War. In British history happened a lot of wars, and the next one we call Wars of Roses. The Wars of Roses was a civil war. It lasted for 30 years from 1455 to 1487. However, the battles were mostly small and sometimes very years apart. The Wars of Roses was fought between two rival families who both laid claim to the throne of England, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. The War of Roses comes from the symbols or badges of the two warring houses. The House of Lancaster was represented by a red rose and the House of York by a white rose. The reasons behind the wars are very complex. Both houses claim to have right to the English throne as descendants to King Edward III. It didn't help that the current king, Henry VI, was mentally ill and was being advised by corrupt and unpopular nobles. In the second part of the war joined the two houses, the House of Tudor, and in 1487 the House of Tudor, led by Henry VII, defeated the House of York at the Battle of Stoke Field. This brought the Wars of Roses to an end. Henry Tudor was declared king and new British era began.
The House of Tudors ruled from year 1485 to 1603. During this era, the English nation was transformed from a medieval kingdom into a modern state, which later became a major world power. After the Wars of Roses, the nation was in chaos and a powerful man was needed to rule. That man was Henry VII. Shortly after his coronation, he married his cousin Elizabeth, daughter of Edward IV, the head of the House of York, so two rival houses were united. He also made two political alliances by marrying his eldest son Arthur to Catherine of Aragon and his daughter Margaret to James IV of Scotland. The biggest revolutionary movement in Tudor times was the Reformation. Catholics and Protestants fought with an intensity that reached fanatical proportions in the middle of the 16th century, mainly during the reign of Henry VIII. Almost immediately after his father's death, Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow. When his newborn son tragically died, Henry threw himself into preparing for war. Henry's army was in Normandy, and in his absence a Scottish army invaded England, but was defeated. These victories have made Henry be seen as a strong ruler on the international stage. By 1526 Henry knew that Catherine would never give him the son he so badly wanted, so he threw himself into the great matter. He wanted to get out of this marriage so he could marry Anne Boleyn. When the Pope declined to grant him a divorce, Henry pronounced himself head of the Church in England. Even Thomas More, a leading intellectual and a friend to the Dutch scholar Erasmus, refused to approve of this divorce or accept Henry as the head of the English Church. Henry was excommunicated by the Pope, while More was later created a saint. By the time Henry rejected the Pope's authority, Anne was already pregnant. Elizabeth was born, and Henry was really angry that it was not a male child. When Anne's next two pregnancies ended in miscarriage, Henry got Anne executed. Not long after that, Henry married Jane Seymour. In October 1536, Edward, Henry's son, was born. Unhappily, Jane died several days after giving birth. Henry has yet been married 3 times, with Anne of Cleves, then Catherine Howard, and last Catherine Parr. When Henry died, his son Edward VI was only 9 years old. He succeeded as king with Edward Seymour, his strongly Protestant uncle, as regent and Lord Protector. However, after 2 years, Seymour was sent to the Tower of London to be executed as traitor, and after barely 6 years of Edward's reign, he died of tuberculosis. History was made when, in the summer of 1553, Mary became the first woman to succeed to the English throne. But she started to be very unpopular when she married Prince Philip of Spain. Her citizens didn't want to see this Catholic foreigner being on the throne. Those who opposed her were called heretics and burned at the stakes. Not long after that she died in November 1558, having acknowledged her half-sister Elizabeth as her successor. Elizabeth's birth was a huge disappointment to her parents. After her mother Anne Boleyn was beheaded, Elizabeth was declared a bastard and kept at a distance from Henry. When Mary became a queen, Elizabeth became the hope of Protestants. After her coronation, she took all the responsibilities and started ruling. Elizabeth was quick to take credit for her council's decisions, except when this make her unpopular, as with the execution of Mary Queen of Scots. Mary, a Catholic, had become a danger to Elizabeth's reign. In 1587, when given Mary's death warrant, Elizabeth had signed it. Then, on discovering that Mary had been executed, she became hysterical and sent one member of the council to the Tower. Elizabeth's council also urged her to marry, so she could produce a male heir, but she was reluctant to obligate and never married. That's why she is called the Virgin Queen. During Elizabeth's reign, the Renaissance finally reached English shores. The kingdom established a growing international reputation for scholarship and literature, whilst producing a William Shakespeare, the finest playwright the world has ever known. Although there was sort of peace during the 16th century, England remained in constant peril of invasion from France and Spain. Towards the end of the century, as the Spanish Armada sailed up the English Channel, the nation faced its greatest external threat since the Norman Conquest. England's famous victory represented the Tudors' greatest political achievement. At the beginning of 1603, when the Queen was in her 60th year, her condition worsened. Elizabeth died in March after choosing James VI of Scotland, Elizabeth's cousin and the son of Mary Queen of Scots, to be her successor.